Hello. Before I start, I want to acknowledge Luke Skinner and my collaborators also listed here. Wow, this doesn't really work. Because they made a significant contribution to the project, and without their contribution I wouldn't be standing here and showing the exciting results that we obtained. So climate anomalies during the last glacial period, we have seen this before. How do I go on? No? Oh, okay. So climate anomalies during the last glacial period, as shown here, observed in Greenland ice cores, manifest a fundamental characteristic of the climate system, the ability of the climate system to shift abruptly between cold stadial climate states and warm interstadial climate states. And what they also manifest, so Dansgaard-Oeschger cycles also manifest basically the tight bond between the cryosphere, the atmosphere, and the ocean, because some of those stadial periods, as highlighted here, have been associated with a massive deposition of IRD in the North Atlantic, and therefore with a massive freshwater forcing in the North Atlantic. So, but we also observe a similar variability of the climate system in other regions. So, as observed here in planktonic 018 record from the Iberian margin shown here. So they basically show that the surface hydrography of the Iberian margin shows a very close covariance and similar timing to the Greenland ice core record. But also we see a similar variability in the Cariaco Basin, so reflectance, so the color reflectance in a sediment core from the Cariaco Basin shows again a similar pacing and timing. And the same variability is seen in the Arabian Sea, basically showing a close covariability in the response of the monsoon system and in the response of the upwelling in the Arabian Sea. But this list can actually go on and on. In fact, all those red triangles here showing us the locations of climate archives that show basically some kind of Dansgaard-Oeschger cycles. But what we also see is that these locations are primarily located in the northern hemisphere. And I asked the question, are Dansgaard-Oeschger cycles limited to the northern hemisphere, or don't we have the right sediment archives from the southern hemisphere that record Dansgaard-Oeschger cycles in the Southern Ocean? And what has also puzzled us a lot in the last decades is we don't really know what the driving mechanisms of Dansgaard-Oeschger cycles are. So the canonical explanation of Dansgaard-Oeschger cycles, as we already heard, has been associated with the AMOC, in particular with perturbations of the AMOC associated with freshwater release in the North Atlantic, but we still don't know the exact timing, the source, and the magnitude of this forcing. So for instance, some of those Heinrich events that I've showed you before, in particular those highlighted here in black, have been associated with the freshwater forcing from the Laurentide ice sheet. Some of those have been associated with the Eurasian ice sheet. And some of those highlighted here, next one, have been associated with a particular weak forcing. And another puzzling issue is the following. So those Dansgaard-Oeschger stadials highlighted here, we don't really know whether they are associated with the freshwater forcing at all. And I'm going to tackle this question in this talk. So in order to investigate these two questions that I brought up, we investigated this high-resolution sediment core MD07 3076Q. It comes from a water depth of 4 kilometers, and we take advantage of the fact that it's located in a very steep gradient in bottom water carbonate ion concentrations as shown in this map. So MD07 3076 is influenced by very low carbonate ion, high PCO2 waters from the southern hemisphere, so southern component waters, but also high carbonate ion, low PCO2 waters from the northern hemisphere, so northern component waters. And the rationale of our investigation is basically to reconstruct sensitive shifts in this boundary here, in this deep water carbonate ion boundary, based on planktonic foraminifera census counts and also fragmentation census counts. So I'm going to show you, before I kind of attack you with my wiggly lines, I want to introduce the proxies that I use. So I use planktonic abundances because planktonic foraminifera are not only tiny and beautiful, but they're also very prone to dissolution. So the more planktonic foraminifera we find in our core, the better the preservation of sediments are, so the less corrosive the bottom waters are. And the same is valid for the benthic to planktonic ratio, and of course the shell fragmentation index is self-explaining. So here is the data. So what I show is basically all three proxies, and the upward direction is pointing towards better preservation in the sediment, so compared to the Greenland ice cores. So what we observe is that during the Heinrich events, we have the tendency towards more corrosive bottom waters during each of the Heinrich events, interestingly. So we have, primarily during the big Heinrich events, we have stronger fragmentation, we have more benthics and less planktonic foraminifera. And we also observe the similar changes during the smaller Heinrich events. In contrast, during the Dansgaard-Oeschger interstadials, as highlighted here with the orange bar, we see the tendency of better preservation in the sediment core. That's really interesting. So we see abrupt changes in the preservation at our core site. So if we take all those three proxy records, stack them, smooth them, and take the average, we end up with something that we call the calcite saturation index. And the calcite saturation index closely co-varies with changes we observe in the Greenland ice cores. So what I propose this suggests is that the North Atlantic region and the deep sub-Antarctic Atlantic are tightly coupled. Yeah? So another proposition that I want to make from these results is the following. So not only Heinrich events, as mentioned earlier, are associated with a perturbation in the AMOC and therefore shifts in the presence of the water masses at our core location, but also the Dansgaard-Oeschger, the small lasting Dansgaard-Oeschger cycles, so small Dansgaard-Oeschger stadials. Yeah? So what I propose is that all North Atlantic climate anomalies climate stadials are associated with a perturbation of the AMOC. And we are quite confident about the timing of these changes, about the quasi-synchrony of these observations, because the core is actually really well dated. So we made a very, very long-lasting effort to do that right. So the upper core section is dated by about 60 radiocarbon measurements, all corrected for varying reservoir ages. And the lower core section is dated via an alignment of assemblage variations in the cold water species Neogloboquadrina pachyderma sinistral, aligned to temperature variations, to the rate of change of Antarctic temperature. And this is consistent with previous findings, for example, by Barker et al. In 2009. And what we achieve with our age model is also very interesting. So the benthic O18 in our record measured on Cedes Kullenbergi is in very close variability, in very close resemblance with the Antarctic temperature record. So this opens up basically a box of Pandora, basically. So because we have two hemisphere signals in one core combined. But my question is, what is actually driving the tight coupling between the northern hemisphere and the deep sub-Antarctic Atlantic? And in order to understand these mechanisms, we consulted transient model simulation results with the Loftclim model, and this has been done by Laurie Menviel here. And what she has done is, so she forced the model with a time-varying freshwater forcing here during this time period. And what the model does is it very nicely reproduces the temperature history or temperature evolution over Greenland. So the gray line is showing you the actual observational evidence, and the black line is the model data. And the same holds true for the Iberian margin. But what the model also reproduces is actually very strong very strong changes in the AMOC index. So not only during the Heinrich events, but also during the Dansgaard-Oeschger stadials and interstadials. So we ask ourselves, what is actually the teleconnection in the model between the North Atlantic and the deep sub-Antarctic Atlantic? And what we found is basically that the deep sub-Antarctic carbonate ion variations at our core site here in the model are, first of all, in very close agreement with our proxy data, but they also very much resemble the AMOC index. And we take this as strong evidence, or we believe that the only process in the model to drive these strong resemblance is actually the propagation of oceanic waves. So the propagation of Kelvin and Rossby waves over decadal timescales lead to these abrupt shifts, or to ocean circulation anomalies in the deep sub-Antarctic Atlantic. And over sub-millennial timescales, of course, the anomalies of that vective transport also plays a role. So what we believe is that oceanic pathways are a very dominant or a very efficient pathway to connect the northern hemisphere, the North Atlantic, with the deep sub-Antarctic Atlantic. We also tested whether atmospheric teleconnection might play a role. So what is plotted here is actually the zonal wind stress in the Southern Ocean, and we observed that it's closely covariant with the AMOC as well, or with Greenland, but the total change in wind stress is very tiny. It's only 10%, and we believe that this is not strong enough to drive changes at 4-kilometer depths in the deep sub-Antarctic Atlantic. So with this, I want to wrap up this talk. So I ask initially, do we have Dansgaard-Oeschger cycles in the southern hemisphere? And I hope that I could convince you that the quasi-synchronous, the rapid and the persistent changes that we observe in the deep sub-Antarctic Atlantic are very closely linked with North Atlantic and with Greenland Dansgaard-Oeschger cycles. And to spur the discussion about the causes of Dansgaard-Oeschger climate variability, our proxy data is consistent with the idea that all AMOC perturbations are linked, all North Atlantic stadials are linked with the perturbation of the AMOC, and these perturbations are quickly and very rapidly transmitted to the deep sub-Antarctic Atlantic via the ocean. Thank you very much.
All right, there's time for some questions. If there are any. Yeah, you're in the front.
So, I noticed that GEO 567, there are 3 events.
Yeah, 6.
Can you repeat?
Sorry, yeah, sure. So the question was about that 5 and so Dansgaard-Oeschger event 5 and 7-8 seem to be there, but Dansgaard-Oeschger event 6 seems to be missing. That's correct. We see a very tiny Dansgaard-Oeschger 6. I don't want to say that it's significant, but it's there. I don't know why this is the case. I also believe, so for instance, that I also believe that Greenland Dansgaard-Oeschger cycles in the ice cores are different from the marine analogs. So this has been observed in the Carriacou Basin, and this might also apply for the Dansgaard-Oeschger event 6 in our core. But yeah, you're right, of course. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, go ahead. Oh, sorry.
The idea of using the Kelvin waves to propagate the signal to the north and the south, how then would that affect the carbonate ion in the deep water?
Yeah, so we think that the carbonate, so that the Kelvin and Rossby waves change the density structure of the ocean. So by invoking density changes, we trigger anomalous bottom water currents that would lead to shifts in the carbonate ion concentration at the core site. So that's what we think drives these changes.
All right.
Oh.
So I think you could get changes in the deep water carbonate by changing the mixing ratio or by changing the temperature values. Have you considered the possibility of changing the temperature?
Yeah, so the question was about whether end member changes might account for the changes we have observed. Well, the time that takes the end member to advect to the deep sub-Antarctic Atlantic would not happen within decades, I guess. So model results have shown that it takes at least 300, 400, 500 years to do so. So, but yes, there will definitely be end member changes. Yeah.